All right, family, this is one of those moments where I want to stand on the couch and start clapping like a proud parent at a kindergarten graduation, because the Dietary Guidelines for Americans 2025 through 2030 just dropped. And the headline is basically, Eat Real Food. And if you've followed me for any amount of time, you already know why this matters. Most of what we're calling chronic disease is really chronic dysfunction driven by root causes, especially insulin resistance. And we've been trying to mop the floor while the faucet is still running. These new guidelines feel like somebody finally walked over to the sink. Before I break it down, comment with a big fat happy face or heart if you're loving the changes in the new dietary guidelines. Now, here's the big picture win. The guidelines explicitly push a framework built around nutrient-dense foods, protein, dairy, vegetables, fruits, healthy fats, and whole grains, paired with a dramatic reduction in highly processed foods loaded with refined carbs, added sugars, sodium, unhealthy fats, and additives. They also say very clearly that the U.S. is in a health emergency, with chronic disease driving massive health spending and worsening obesity and pre-diabetes trends. But here's the part that made me smile as a low-carb keto carnivore doc. They explicitly acknowledge that some people with chronic disease may improve outcomes on lower carbohydrate diets. That is not a small sentence. That's a permission slip for clinicians and patients who have been told for years, just eat more carbs, but make them wholesome carbs. Meanwhile, their A1C is climbing like it's training for Everest. Now let's talk about what this means in real life, because a PDF can't heal you, but it can change what schools, programs, institutions, and families consider normal. So here are the big guideline moves. Then I'll break down what matters most for insulin resistance. They emphasize protein at every meal with animal and plant options listed, cutting down on highly processed foods, specifically calling out salty sweet packaged foods like chips, cookies, and candy, and avoiding sugar-sweetened beverages like soda, fruit drinks, and energy drinks. A very strong stance on added sugar. They say no amount of added sugars or non-nutritive sweeteners is recommended as part of a healthy diet. And they call for avoiding added sugar entirely for kids 4 and under. Healthy fats from whole foods, meats, poultry, eggs, omega-3 rich seafood, nuts, seeds, full-fat dairy, olives, avocados. And they even name options like olive oil, butter, and beef tallow for cooking. Whole grains are still there, fiber-rich whole grains, while telling people to significantly reduce refined carbs like white bread, packaged breakfast foods, flour tortillas, crackers. Hydration. Choose water, still or sparkling, and unsweetened beverages. Sodium. General guidance is under 2,300 milligrams per day for ages 14 plus. But they also note highly active people may need more due to sweat losses. Alcohol. Consume less, and they list groups that should avoid it entirely. Pregnancy. Certain meds or conditions. Recovery from alcohol use disorder, etc. And they include special populations guidance. That includes infants, kids, adolescents, plus things like avoiding caffeinated beverages for kids and making cooking a regular household routine. Now, let's break down what matters most, especially if insulin resistance is part of your story, because this is where the rubber meets the road, or the ribeye or ground beef burger meets the grill. First, protein. Protein is the adult in the room. It supports muscle, satiety, and better appetite regulation. And the guidelines explicitly prioritize protein foods in every meal. When most people get enough protein, a funny thing happens. They stop being mysteriously snacky every 2 hours, because your body doesn't crave cookies. Your body craves nutrients. Cookies are just what your brain's reward system suggests when it's underfed and overstimulated. Second, vegetables and fruit. With a metabolic health lens, the guidelines say, eat a variety of colorful vegetables and fruits. Choose whole forms. And they even give daily serving goals for a 2,000 calorie pattern. 3 servings of vegetables and 2 servings of fruit. They also say 100% juice should be limited or diluted with water. Now here's my friendly doctor add-on while staying positive. If you are metabolically healthy, fruit can absolutely be reasonable. But if you're insulin resistant, pre-diabetic, or type 2 diabetic, the phrase eat fruit throughout the day can accidentally become I'm basically sipping nature's candy on repeat. So I want you to hear my nuance. Prioritize non-starchy vegetables as your default. And if you're doing fruit, lean toward low glycemic fruit. Think berries, especially early on. That way, you're getting a benefit without turning your glucose graph into a roller coaster designed by Six Flags. Third, healthy fats and the saturated fat nuance. The guidelines do a great job emphasizing fats from whole foods, and they clearly name real options like eggs, full-fat dairy, olives, avocados, plus cooking fats like olive oil, butter, and beef tallow. But they also include the line that saturated fat should not exceed 10% of total daily calories. Here's where I add my respectful note from the clinic. There's a well-known JACC state-of-the-art review in 2020 arguing that the long-standing recommendation to limit saturated fat is not strongly supported by the totality of evidence, and notes that recent meta-analyses show no clear benefit for cardiovascular disease or total mortality from reducing saturated fat, while some analyses show positive associations with stroke. Now, this is important. This is still a debated area in nutrition science, and not every cardiology or public health body agrees. But my hope is that future guidelines will continue evolving toward a food-based approach that doesn't automatically treat saturated fat like a villain in every story, especially when people are eating less sugar and fewer ultra-processed foods. Fourth, whole grains and why insulin resistance changes the math. The guidelines say, prioritize fiber-rich whole grains with a general goal of 2 to 4 servings a day, and strongly reduce refined carbs like white bread, packaged breakfast options, tortillas, and crackers. I completely agree with the refined carb warning, because refined carbs are basically the fast lane to why am I hungry again? But here's a gentle caution for people with insulin resistance. Even healthy grains can still deliver a big glucose load. For example, a cup of cooked brown rice is about 46 grams of carbohydrate. A cup of cooked quinoa is about 39 grams of carbohydrate. And dividing the total grams of carbs by 4 estimates the teaspoons of sugar. So you're basically getting 10 plus teaspoons of sugar with those 2 examples. If you tolerate that, great. But if you're insulin resistant, that could be like pouring a bucket of carbs on a hormonal problem that already struggles with carb handling. So my approach is, grains are not evil, but they are not free. And if your A1C, triglycerides, belly fat, cravings, or fatty liver are waving at you like red flags, grains, yes, even high fiber grains, deserve caution and personalization. Quick pause. If this is helpful and you want more content that actually treats root causes and not just symptoms, hit like and subscribe. Because the goal isn't to win an internet argument. The goal is to help people get their lives back. Now, here's why you should celebrate this moment. Because for years, the story sounded like eat less, move more. And if that doesn't work, you're the problem. These guidelines are at least pointing the finger where it belongs, at a food environment dominated by highly processed products engineered for overconsumption. They encourage home-prepared meals. They list examples of added sugars on labels and warn people to actually look. They talk about gut health and even mention fermented foods like kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, while warning that highly processed foods can disrupt the microbiome. And they say out loud what many clinicians like me have been quietly living. Some people do better with lower carb approaches for chronic disease. So here's the vibe I want you to carry. This isn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But this is a major step in the right direction. And the speed matters too. Because to see a shift this big, this quickly, is something worth applauding. So what do you do today? Here's your simple move. Pick one meal and make it a real food meal. Start with protein. If you're not carnivore like me, add a non-starchy vegetable. Use whole food fats. Skip the refined carbs and added sugars. And then watch what happens to your hunger, your energy, your cravings, your sleep, and your labs. Because the body is honest. It always tells the truth eventually. Drop a comment. Are you excited about these guidelines? What lane are you in right now? Low carb, keto, carnivore, or one of the plant-based diets? And before you leave, maybe check out the video right here on the screen, or subscribe to my channel here. Because we're not just flipping a pyramid, we're flipping the script on chronic disease.